The Martyr's Pit, written by Strict Departure 152. When I studied at university, come second year, I had to find a place off campus to live. I studied in a city called Canterbury, located in Kent, England. It's a gorgeous city, very historical, very bustling. It was almost like everywhere you looked, there was some mark of ancient times to behold. I found it all very enchanting, but not so much now. Aside from boasting its history, Canterbury is also very expensive to rent a house in, especially if you are a second-year student who has thus far been living on a foolproof diet of biscuits, tea, and headache tablets. So, when it came time to find a house, I was dreading the inevitable cost of rent and utilities that came with it. I found a house. However, the rent was significantly lower than the others, by a few hundred even. I didn't really think to ask why. The landlords that offer rundown, shamble homes tend to wiggle the prices in exchange that students don't report them to the authorities. It was close to a corner shop, a local convenience store for you lot across the pond. It was just a small walk away from a bus stop to the university and the city center where all of the shops were. Looking at the benefits, I couldn't believe such a miraculous discovery and took the contract as soon as I was able. Paid my deposit and hauled in what little belongings I had into my new bedroom. There were 3 bedrooms to choose from, 2 upstairs and 1 downstairs, right next to the front door. A converted living room space complete with a sealed-up chimney and comically large window for a bedroom. Curtained, of course, to keep the people walking along the street and their noses out of my business. Now, I did have roommates, incredibly good friends of mine to this day, but they hardly stayed more than they needed to. Every weekend was them going off home to a more comfortable house with their families. Either that, or they were overnight on campus in the library surviving off of coffee and determination not to fail their module. This left me home alone often, which, truthfully, I didn't mind. I'm a quiet person, and I like my alone time. If you've stuck with me this far, then thank you. I didn't know how to start this off without providing enough context for this situation of mine to be understood. But now that I've hopefully set the environment, I can delve into, well, I'm not really sure what it all was and is. The house was close to a small park. Not really a recreational or fun one, more like a stretch of grass up a hill with a concrete path and a bench, outlined by an iron gate. The one standout feature of this area was a large obelisk sat in the very front right corner of this grassland, perched upon an uneven grassy mound. I never really bothered with it. If you've lived or been in England at all, you know that war monuments of an exact same feature are dotted about the country. I assumed the same of this one. I did note the missing wreaths, but honestly, the road it was on was pretty solitary. I didn't think anybody thought to bother putting any wreaths down. One night, after a particularly stressful bout of essay writing, I decided to walk the length of the street to clear my head. The little crumb of garden we had just wasn't doing it for me, so I walked and found myself staring at the monument. In the dead silence, I made the effort to go into the little grass park and read the obelisk out of sheer curiosity. The Pit. I remember reading the words on the plaque, the names embellished pale on light granite, a list of faceless others, a monument dedicated to the lost souls, but not in any one war. What now stood as a mound was a burning pile, where 41 people were burned at the stake and 4 hanged. Where I was standing was the lumpy remains of a pit where corpses would have been slumped and burned to death. A cold feeling washed over me. With no one around to soothe my fright, I did the only reasonable thing I could and went back to my house. It made sense to me then why the road was named Martyr's Field. I joked that I finally understood why the rent was so cheap in comparison to the rest of the city. Nobody wanted to live next to the park with the dingy grass and the thought of bones lost underneath the dead roots of trees. And really, neither did I. But what could I have done? I had no money and nowhere to go that I could afford. There was no alternative for me, so I sucked it up like an adult and moved on, trying to unlearn the reality of what I lived a meager 10 steps away from. I was being silly. I'd let my fears and superstitions get in the way. The reality wasn't going to be that I was in any danger. I wish so badly that I had just listened to myself for once. I let the days pass by me, consumed in a sea of university work that I just couldn't put off any longer. And it seemed as though I was well and truly over and unbothered by the quirky little obelisk neighbor I had gained. It didn't matter anymore. It was just a fact sitting in the dusty crevice of my mind. A fun bit of trivia to bring up whenever I was on a night out and wanted to scare my drinking group. I remember it so clearly that it still puts a pit in my stomach. It was early morning at about 1. I was in the narrow kitchen making a cup of tea for myself. It was me, sans roommates, as normal, but I noticed a detail I hadn't before. My neighbors have a window into their kitchen that I could just about see. I noticed that their light was on. Now I know it doesn't sound weird, but up to that point I didn't even know I had neighbors. They were so silent, I just assumed the house was empty and let it be at that. But the light never went out. All day and all night it would be on no matter what time I entered the kitchen. Sometimes I waited, even studied in the kitchen just to see if someone would eventually walk in and realize they had left the lights on. Nobody came. The kitchen saw no one. No one cooked, cleaned, or meandered in it. Yet the light strained on. What had become a strange observation developed into a habit. I would check every single time I entered my kitchen for any sign of life or wilting bulb, only to find neither. It didn't sit well with me, but I couldn't do much other than postulate over my tea and wrinkle my nose at the plethora of ideas that wafted about my head. It was one of those colder, quieter nights when something really happened. At 4 a.m, and yet again home alone, I worked on my laptop in the pitch black of my room. I started during the daylight hours and couldn't find the energy to turn on my light by the time night had come. Eventually, my attention dwindled to fine straw and I shut the laptop lid to give my eyes a break from the stream of text that was on my screen. Please, if you believe nothing else of what I've said, believe this, please. A woman sat at my window, sat on nothing with no chair. She looked outside and had her hair up neat in a white bonnet. Every fiber of my being flooded colder than anything I'd ever felt in my life. I couldn't move or speak or even blink. My eyes were glued to her. She turned to look at me, her face gaunt and horrible. She looked starved and exhausted, as if she had been crying. I didn't know what to do. And then I watched her vanish in front of me, in front of my fucking eyes. I sat there on my bed and cried. I'd never been so afraid of anything in my life. My belief in ghosts before then had been a light-hearted curiosity, but I didn't want to believe anymore. Now that something had confronted me, I begged for it to be a stupid hoax. I couldn't settle after that. What little sleep I used to get was chipped away at. I was scared to look at my window at night. I didn't go to the corner she sat in. I didn't even glance at it. And then the voice started. That little voice in your head that is yours but isn't quite yours. It told me a name. Anne. I don't know anyone with that name, but it was all my mind could think about. It was like I couldn't even control my thoughts. It all trailed back to that one name. Another night came, a few after the last. A rare occasion where my roommates were in their rooms, asleep. The bathroom was upstairs with them, and after failing to sleep, I decided I would splash my face and have a small drink of water in the kitchen. I walked the staircase, and at its top I heard it, the faintest murmur of a woman crying. Now, this is at 4 a.m, and both of the lights in my roommates' rooms were out. Concerned, I tiptoed to their respective rooms and listened in case either of them were struggling and needed an ear. The rooms were silent, but the crying remained. I walked back to the top of the staircase and... Sorry, my heart still thuds when I think about it. A woman gasped in my ear, an inch from it at best, as if she had been caught unexpectedly. After the gasp, the crying stopped. I was left in silence, terrified and sprinting back to my room downstairs. My house felt like a prison. I ended up getting paranoid, hearing scratches in the sealed chimney, knocking on my window, the distant shuffling of things in other rooms. I was at a loss, and despite how much I didn't want to put my faith into a stranger, I ended up taking a walk to the city center, to an occult shop. The woman behind the counter actually did soothe my worries. She didn't think I was insane or being dramatic for the sake of it. She wondered if it was the spirit of someone from the pit. It had to be, surely. She told me that it was unlikely the spirit meant any harm and was just grieving a tragic end to her own life. She gave me a thing, a pointed crystal with a gold chain, something to talk to the ghost with. I asked her how much it was. I don't really like that way of selling items, but she told me to keep it. I'm glad that occult shop is closed down. Wretched woman. Stupid, stupid woman, and stupid me for trusting her. Stupid. Why did I do it? I want to pull my hair out when I remember it, sitting cross-legged in the middle of my empty house with the pointed end of the white crystal over my palm, like the woman told me. It circled one way for yes and another for no. I don't know why I did it. I was so scared I thought I would vomit. But I wanted the crying to stop, the noises to stop. I wanted Anne to stop. Was she Anne? The crystal told me yes. Did she die here? The crystal told me yes. Was she one of the martyrs? The crystal told me yes. I felt sad. My fright ebbed in favor of sympathy. This poor woman lost her life so horribly. The woman's voice drifted to mind. Just a grieving spirit, a lonely one. I tried to make my peace with that, so I told her that I was sorry about her death and that I would leave something at the obelisk. I asked her if she would like me to do that. I didn't get a reply. The crystal dangled still over my hand, and I watched it and wait for some sort of motion to confirm or deny. When no answer came, I gave up and plopped the crystal into my hand to be put in my drawer. I never closed that door, the one they tell you about when you're supposed to say goodbye. I didn't think about it. Despite not getting a reply, I still left a small flower on the obelisk's large stone base. I looked over the names of the perished, and my eyes locked onto one name that could not peel itself off of my mind. Anne Albright, the only Anne on the list among those burned in the pit. The street had never felt so hostile, empty and yet brimming with a growing anger. It was like the mood of the entire street had been altered. I didn't stay longer, I just went home. It was the only place I could go. I tried to tell my roommates. They laughed at me, and fair enough. It does and did sound utterly ridiculous. There wouldn't be any convincing them. It was just me. I tried to talk to Anne again, night after night with Crystal in hand. Was she old or young, married? Did she work? I had so many questions for her that received no reply. I asked her if she was the one I heard crying a few nights ago. The crystal writhed to life and circled out in affirmative. I stared at it and quelled what nausea was piling up in my stomach. I asked her if she was sad. Another yes. It seemed obvious. Silence, but not a calm one, tense and almost suffocating. I couldn't think of what to say. I asked her if she was unhappy about me living here. What a stupid thing to ask in hindsight. When the crystal spun yes, I thought I was going to faint. I couldn't leave. I told Anne that and that I was sorry. I asked if she was angry with me. Yes. She said yes. I dropped the crystal onto the floor and left it there. I couldn't cope with the answer, with the reality of it. I locked myself in my room and waited for something to happen. I wasn't sure what, but I waited. It all deteriorated from there. I remember being in the kitchen, turning and finding her thin, ragged body in the doorway, like a blur, a glitch in my vision. She disappeared before I could ever focus on her. It was like she lived in the corner of my eye. I should have known something was going to happen. I noticed one day that the neighbors had their kitchen light off. With all else going on, I didn't even give it a second thought. This time I knew my roommates were home. I kept my bedroom door locked and my headphones on to study. I got a text from one of them asking how studying was going. The two roommates had plans to pull an all-nighter at the library again. I opted not to go in favor of finishing my work at home. I respond and put my phone down. Then I hear a knock at my door. Now I really didn't feel like leaving bed, so I pretended that I couldn't hear the knock and just waited it out. What happened next was the most violent slamming on my door I have ever heard. It thundered from the other side like my roommate was trying to tear it down to get to me. In shock, I watched the door rattle until it stops and completely stills. I thought it was a huge overreaction to not being answered. I texted my roommate if she had knocked on my door, feigning ignorance. She sent me a selfie of her and my other roommate, already in the library. I stared at it for God knows how long. I didn't open the door, didn't unlock it. I actually hoped it was a real person. I hoped. I couldn't handle the thought that Anne was the culprit. When I did open my door, hours and hours later, the dark wood had been all but clawed. Long nail marks from the handle to the very bottom scarred the door, and my heart all but beat itself into a frenzy. I had nowhere to go. Nowhere. I walked out and found my crystal moved from the floor to the table. I didn't want to talk to her anymore. I regretted trying in the first place. I left it in the garden. It was in my bedroom by the morning, untouched and on my desk. I felt sick seeing it. She wanted me to talk. She wanted me to have that thing. I took it and ran outdoors with it and chucked it at the obelisk. I went back home and shut my front door. I hated the silence, hated it. I paced every single room until I had no choice but to sleep after hours of being plagued by this nightmare. I woke up with scratches on my legs, a horrible burning feeling on my thighs in the middle of the night. It stung so badly. I looked in the bathroom mirror and found red, angry welts on my skin. So angry. I still remember how much they hurt to touch, how raw and throbbing they felt. My summer break was coming up, a chance to escape this utter nightmare for a few months. I packed all night to expect my parents in the morning. I was elated. I couldn't wait to go. I needed to be gone. I was surprised by the clatter of something in the sealed chimney. A moving bird, a clumsy pigeon, and then a clink in my living room. Struck with fear, I heard the distant tap draw further and further into the kitchen. I heard the kettle pop on with a low grumble, the metal clang of cutlery. I didn't want to see. I didn't, but I went anyway. Maybe out of some hope for closure, a modicum of peace. As I approached the kitchen and the bubbling kettle, I flipped it off. The tentative silence stretched on until I heard something scuttle across my living room floor. The crystal. It sat in a heap, wet from the rain outside, complete with fragments of pulled grass. My journey home was unpleasant. I wasn't even glad to leave for the summer. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at that house, knowing I would have to return to it, knowing what awaited me in there once I got back. I still didn't offer a goodbye. I left that door open mindlessly. We drove by the obelisk and I looked away from it. I couldn't stomach seeing it again. The mound where a pit once sat. A horrible pit. A grave. I never wanted to return. And now that I am far away, I will never come back to it again. I only hope that whoever is there now doesn't suffer like I did. This was a long and troubling story. I am hesitant to offer, but I actually do have pictures of the pit, the obelisk, and my crystal. I may be able to find other pictures, but for now that is what I can offer you all as thanks for hearing my story. I don't blame you if you are skeptical. I would be if it were anyone else but me. All I can offer you is this. Do not visit this place. Do not go near the obelisk, the street, any of it. Please. You don't want whatever is clinging to that area. Please. Thank you. Thank you for listening. You can probably handle another horror story, right?